My name is Mariatta, and in addition to what Katni said earlier, yes, I just started a consulting company called Command Lines. Hire us. And I'm a Python core developer. For those who don't know what that means, basically I can merge PRs in CPython repository. I'm also a member of the Python documentation editorial board, and if you're not sure what that is, go search on the internet PEP 732. So you might see my company name, Command Lines. I think maybe you thought I made a typo. It should be Command Lines, right? But that's just one of the things I do on the internet. I sometimes made typos that are funny to me. I share it on the internet, and people have started sharing their own funny typos. So like work-life balance. Like sometimes people just say, there's no typo here. We should have this word for real. So if you're interested, if days have been hard for you, looking for some chuckles, check out typo of the day hashtag. So Changelong is one of those typos. I was trying to type changelog, and it came out Changelong, and I found it interesting. Like, what is changelong? It seems like it could be a real word. I guess it could just mean lots of changes, big changes, so the changelog is really, really long, or maybe some changes just takes time to happen to implement. Or maybe you can think about it like in a sense of longing for a change, like wishing for something to happen differently. So this whole thing is about changelong. This whole making change, big changes, lots of changes, things that takes a long time. So changelog is not a typo, it's a real thing. And for those of you who are not familiar, I hope you are, but changelog is a record, like a document that keeps track, records notable changes of software. If you ever upgraded your dependencies, it keeps the record of like significant changes from one version to another, changelog. So in Python, there is this document called What's New in Python. It always comes together whenever there's a new release of Python. You should read it to understand changes in Python. I think other projects, other open source projects, I noticed they have changelog.md, release notes, those are changelogs. So as a user, we rely on changelog. I read them. Like whenever one of the dependencies have a new version, before I actually integrate the changes, I need to read to know what's being changed. Why do I need to add a new version of this software? So in the changelog, you get to read features, bug fixes, and these are really fun changes. People welcome features and bug fixes because you associate these things with improvements. It's good. Of course, we want new features, new bug fixes. These are welcome and celebrated. But for me, before I look at the new features, I actually scroll down. I want to know what's being deprecated. To me, features are like optional change. I could choose not to use it, but deprecations, that will break things. This means I need to make some changes in my code base to adjust to this change. My product might break, right? Deprecations are disruptive. In addition to that, I think changelog has this hidden purpose. Like not just it tells you what's changed in the code itself, but it's a way to recognize contributions. Like somebody made these changes. Like making commit to open source project, it's an accomplishment. So we celebrate it and we should celebrate it. If one of my commits made it to a changelog, I'm gonna brag about it. And you should too, brag about your open source contributions. It's really a big deal. So making code changes is fun, it's really easy, it's your job as a developer, and even if it's not your job, even if you're not a developer, like you're just learning, you're a hobbyist, code changes is super fun, super easy. There is a process, like we've established a process on how to make code changes. Just go to any open source project. It's the same thing. You want to change the code, open a PR. Discuss it. You're gonna have to convince the maintainer. You open an issue, you have a communication back and forth, tell the maintainers, like convince them, please accept my change because X, Y, and Z. I'm Canadian, by the way. I know you say that differently here. So the fact that there is this process makes it easy to make code changes. Not only that, it's just really a rewarding experience. There is this artifact, this product, proof that you did some work. You could go to a repository, you type git log, and then you see your name, authored by you. You could even get mentioned in change logs. Like in every updates, they get you, maybe your name's there. Mariatta implemented X, it's really cool. Code changes is just rewarding, obvious how to do it, expected, celebrated. And when I talk about code changes, I don't mean just code. To me, documentation is part of the code base. You make changes to your documentation the same way you change your code. You write something on the computer, you create a pull request, you got it, it appears in the Git commit history. Documentation changes are code changes. Making changes outside this whole code, that's the hard part. Again, not documentation, but think about organization structure, changes to your process, workflow, even the choice of tools you use, the governance, the infrastructure, and I've heard this terminology, I didn't create this, the human infrastructure of your project. These things, these are the things that allows you to produce code and documentation that's not part of the code base. And these things are just, they don't happen daily. They just don't happen. Sometimes, once you made these decisions in the beginning, once when you set up your team, your project, your company, you made these choices, like you decided, I'm going to use GitHub, or we're going to deploy things to Azure or something, like deciding this is how our leadership structure looks like. Once you make these kind of decisions in the beginning, it's going to stick with you for a long time. And there's just no process. It's not obvious how to even approach making changes to your human infrastructure. And you probably don't have documentation at all in the beginning. Like, you don't document. We chose GitHub because, why? It just, because I like GitHub, or I'm already using Trello for something, I'm just going to use it again. You don't make documentation about this kind of decision. And these kind of changes are behind the scenes. It's not done by the entire team usually, just a few people in your team, maybe just the management team, make this decision and change, and you just live with it. You just decide it, and you take this for granted. It's not something, we just don't give the same fanfare about changes to this human infrastructure. And in my experience, if people try to propose changes to these things, think about somebody saying, let's change our issue tracker. You're gonna fight. It's like, there's a lot more pushbacks to these kind of things. I find people are just not as open to making this kind of changes. You got used to certain process, and maybe this certain process was the thing that attracted you to the team or the company in the first place, right? And you felt like, why change? And sometimes maybe you were the one who set things up in the beginning. Maybe you set that piece of human infrastructure in the beginning. You made the decision, and any proposal to change it, you're gonna take it personally. You're gonna feel like, are you questioning my decision now after years? Like, it feels like you're being undermined. You're gonna take it personally. It's difficult to accept this kind of changes. So changes to human infrastructure is like you just being given deprecation warning. Like, it's disruptive to your life. So it's really easier to let's just keep things the same. Let's dismiss ideas. Just say, it's easier to just say, we've been doing this for a long time. We can continue live like this for even longer. Like, why do we need to change now? Why? Like, nothing's broken, so don't create troubles. Don't fix it. This kind of way of thinking, this kind of excuses, makes it look like there is no cost by keeping things static. But there is the cost. It's just not seen, and it's really difficult to quantify this, because when you stay the same, you're really just delaying change. Like, it's the same as code. Like, when you have a really big PR, it's hard for you to review it. You're piling things up. You're also creating things like technical debt. It's the same thing as not changing your code. It gets harder the more change you've been delaying. If you have a history of saying no to changes like this, you will end up with change long instead of change log. And if pushback is a habit, like if this becomes your default response, it becomes the culture to say no, to give pushback. I think that's really dangerous. Like, if whenever someone suggests change and your first reaction is, why? Is something broken? Over time, people just get discouraged, because this kind of pushback and rejections are really demoralizing. It makes people reluctant to propose good ideas in the future. So when you say, we're gonna keep the same because everybody here is already used to it, you're telling the newcomers to adopt your process. You're telling the newcomers to change, to be more like you. You're relaying the cost to others and not to you. There is still cost of not changing. So what is considered normal or obvious for you and your current team may not be normal or obvious to the outsiders, to the newcomers, to people who want to join your team or your community. So saying, let's keep it the same, is really saying everybody who wants to join us must follow certain process, your process. So maybe it's true that you don't lose anything by not changing, but at the same time, it really means you're not growing. You're missing out. You're missing out on progress, and you can't put a price on this. And there have been changelongs in Python. Python has actually evolved over time. Not only the code, but also the community, the non-code part. Python had made lots of big changes that just take a long time. So how did Python do it, and what can we learn from Python? To me, Python 2.3 is one of those changelongs. It's a long time. How did Python handle this kind of change? Basically, the Python core developers realized back in 2006, realized that, well, the next version, Python 3, is going to be backward incompatible. But to keep everybody, all the communities and the user happy, they decided we're gonna maintain both versions, version 2 and version 3, for a while. And I think initially the idea is like for about 10 years, until 2015. But 2015 comes along, people still didn't change. So we continue to support Python 2 and 3 until like one day we just said, that's enough. That's long enough. 14 years between those. And at some point, it just becomes difficult to maintain both versions. So after 14 years, support for Python 2 was dropped. Really long time. Python in iOS and browser, like I think for the longest time, Python is like a desktop thing. It didn't exist in the browser, but other technologies that appeared made these things possible. So there are external factors, like the PyScript, which is possible because of technology like WebAssembly. Python on iOS, for the longest time, it was only supported by third-party packages like Kiwi and Briefcase. But starting in Python 3.13, this becomes a supported platform. It took this long for Python to have iOS support, and it is really because the change in external Python, like mobile devices, just becomes more important. We realize that it's important, we need to invest in it. The switch in the Python language, I discovered there's actually a PEP about it, proposing let's add switch statement since 2001. It was rejected because one of the reasons people say at the time, just do if else. You can do this, you don't need a new keyword. The idea was revisited in 2006. They said, well, we're having Python 3. Let's add switch to Python 3. That too was rejected. So, and I remembered seeing something on the internet. People, like even in 2017, people are still asking, can we have switch in Python? And I think like people have started thinking, you know what? If we don't have it by now, we're never gonna get it. But guess what? We have thing to switch to Python now. It just took 20 years. It's called pattern matching, we call it, the match case statement. So we made this happen. It happened. How? Just with time, people's attitude towards it changed. The needs and the community itself has changed. The Python governance have changed in the meantime. And I think one of the reasons this was possible is because Python kept previous history of why this was rejected. They are documented in the PEPs. so that when it's time for someone who wants to propose it again, they could go back in history and understand why it was rejected and come up with different approach and come up with different ways to solve it. And that was all code, but Python existed before Git. So Python has also undergone this change in version control, which is hard. In my entire career, professional career, only once we have tried switching our repository. It's not easy, and this process took a long time. We only started using GitHub in 2017. This very recent in my mind. And it's just really difficult change. It wasn't something like, let's just move everything, copy paste everything. No, this took years. Years of coordination, years of communication. And we did this change because there's just better technologies existed. And things like Git and GitHub just becomes more mainstream, more easily approachable by people. Lots of other open source projects are adopting it, so in a way, we have to follow what the population wants to do. People are already used to GitHub. Let's use it too. We changed the issue tracker. So even though the source code was moved to GitHub in 2017, we were still using a different issue tracker. So we are not now on GitHub, and it only happened like 2 years ago. It's very new. The previous issue tracker was used for about 15 years. So just imagine using the same tool for 15 years. People get used to it. People become attached. They have built their life doing certain things, and now we're telling them, let's use something else. It's disruptive. And this particular change has another kind of challenge, because we were using an open source tool called Roundup, which is also maintained by some of the core developers. So it's really difficult saying that, hey, we're not gonna use your tool anymore because we found something different. It's hard. I feel like I would feel disappointed knowing people stopped using the tool I built, that I maintained. So these are the kind of challenges we have to understand and acknowledge and make decisions that the things that we have to leave away, put aside in order to adopt something new. This was not easy, but we did it. And I think overall, it becomes a more positive experience for all the contributors. We made a change in our communication channel. If you've been in Python long enough, you might heard about mailing lists. Python used the Python Dev mailing list for about 20 years, since 1999. I found the archive. The first message was 1999. Only recently we moved to Discord. Mailing list is now read-only. So again, 20 years, people got used to things. They've built their workflow, understanding how the mailing list works. But the change was made anyway, because there's new technologies become available that wasn't there 20 years ago. And also, the community has grown. There are different needs now that wasn't obvious back then. Moderation was lacking or wasn't there in the mailing list. But we found tools like Discord that allows us to do this, and this becomes important now. And that's why we made this change. So the Python, the code, and the community has really evolved. Big changes have happened, and I think we are not done yet. And I think it's really important to understand how Python made this happen. To me, one of the reasons Python is successful in implementing all of these big changes, these evolutions, is that they treat non-code changes the same as code changes. We ask for PEPs, for proposing infrastructure and governance changes. And if you're not familiar about what is a PEP, it stands for Python Enhancement Proposal, and I have a talk, like PEP talk. This is the barcode that takes you to that video that I gave in North Bay Python. So if you're not familiar, watch the talk. So you really should be establishing process for making human infrastructure changes. Maybe just treat it as a code, like have a repository, have an issue tracker, have Trello, Asana, whatever. Just allow people to propose ideas and document all of this. Document all the decisions, document why you decided to accept these ideas, and document these rejections, because your past decisions can help inform future decision making. And I guess from Python we learned sometimes you just have to wait for the right time to come. I guess you just, maybe there are other changes that need to happen first before the idea you want can be implemented. And be open to ideas. So don't default to asking why. Why is like argumentative. It's like asking people to justify. Like it's, I think instead of asking why do you want to change, ask how. What is it do you want to change? Like this gives people opportunity to really explain what it is, and they might even explain why they want this change without you actually asking why. And even though you're starting by how and what, you still have the right to say no. You can still say why later on, but even if you reject their idea, starting with how and what, it's more inviting, it's a more positive experience. So I recommend resist saying why the first thing, ask how and what. And really consider the growth of your team. You should be making decisions for the whole community, not just for the existing team, not just for the individuals. Really consider the growth, the future team members, the whole team, not just the existing ones. And don't think of all human infrastructure changes as deprecations. They could be bug fixes and new features. So have a change log. As I mentioned earlier, keep a documentation of your human infrastructure and celebrate those changes. Acknowledge the work that's done in this area. Change logs have happened in Python. Again, I think we're not done yet, so I just wanted to share a few ideas or just things that I observed that I wish we could change. The Python documentation, the toolings for this, we've been using the same thing since 2002. Python documentation is built using restructured text and Sphinx. Nothing wrong with this. I like it. I learned to enjoy restructured text. Recently, I work in documentations in Markdown, and I just keep wishing. I wish this is in restructured text and Sphinx. There are features there that I need to use. But I'm noticing I just feel it's an overdue change. I know other projects, maybe other languages aren't even using restructured text or things, and they have documentation. So what are we missing out on, right? And I also noticed a lot of even Python third-party libraries, they are no longer using restructured text. They use something else, Markdown. I hear about MKDocs. Like, looks like there are emerging new technologies. So what are we missing in Python? And I think right now, I don't see we are changing this. I don't know how we will change this, but I personally, I'm watching. I'm waiting. I'm open for this change myself. I have to say myself, not the whole core team. The other change I am wishing to see is in the Python Steering Council election process. The Python Steering Council is fairly new process. This happens after Guido van Rossum retired from being a BDFL. And again, I need to preface saying this is my personal observation. I'm not representing co-developers or the PSF, but I'm observing that currently only 128 people in the world get to vote in the Python Steering Council election. And so far, we have, even though there are non-Python core team who applied, who nominated themselves saying, I would like to serve as a Python Steering Council, the 128 people have never elected people outside the team. And I felt like I don't think it's wrong. All the Steering Council have done a great job, but I'm just thinking, what are we missing out? I know there are a lot of great leaders in the world, in the Python community. I don't know how this change would look like. I don't know how we should change this. All I'm saying is maybe this needs some tweaks. So those are the things that I'm thinking about, but maybe you too, you have your own ideas of, maybe you identify things in the community, in your company, in your team, things that maybe could change. And hopefully you'll think about it, and maybe you could be the one, the driving force to grow this community. Maybe you could be identifying those changes and propose the ideas, and you know how to go about making those changes. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you.